Before the world ever loved Bill Murray, long before the fame and the jokes, there was a boy in a freezing house fighting for a place at the table, and a man who spent the next 75 years trying to heal the wounds he learned to hide behind a smile. Not on a film set, and not under bright studio lights, Bill Murray begins this part of his life in a quiet house in Charleston, South Carolina. He is in his mid-70s now, moving slowly, speaking softly, and spending more time alone than he ever did in his younger years. Charleston suits him. The weather is calm, the ocean air comes in through open windows, and the streets outside his home stay peaceful in the evenings. Inside his house, the lighting is warm and gentle. The rooms are filled with small pieces of his past. There are family photos sitting on shelves, old movie scripts stacked on tables, drawings his children made many years ago, and little reminders of a life that went through many sharp turns, many surprises, and many painful moments. Bill Murray is a man who reached a level of fame most actors never touch. He built a net worth estimated at around $180 million, starred in some of the most loved movies in American history, and became one of the most recognizable comedy figures in the world. But sitting in this quiet Charleston home, none of that feels loud or flashy. The success is real, but the atmosphere around him feels heavy. The house holds a kind of silence that says this stage of his life is less about fame and more about thinking back on what he lived through, what he survived, and what still follows him even now. People around the world know him as the deadpan genius, the man whose serious expressions and carefully timed lines made audiences laugh for decades. They see him as the unpredictable legend who could walk into any scene and somehow make it funnier without raising his voice or changing his calm face. But Bill himself carries a different view of who he is. Behind the dry humor and the relaxed attitude is someone who has been shaped by grief, regret, and long struggles with his mental health. He is a man who has spent most of his life trying to run from the pain he felt as a boy, only to realize, as he grew older, that the past never truly leaves. Many people know parts of his story. They know he lost his father when he was still a teenager. They know his marriages fell apart after years of emotional distance and personal battles he didn't know how to handle. They know he lost Gilda Radner, one of the brightest people in his early life. They know he lost Harold Ramis, the friend who understood him better than almost anyone else. They might also know he lost his mother, his brother Edward, and even his former wife Jennifer, all at different times that hit him harder than he allowed the public to see. And through all of this, he carried depression from a very young age, a feeling that came in waves, sometimes soft, sometimes crushing, but always present somewhere in the background of his life. To understand Bill Murray at 75, you cannot look only at the fame or the movies. You have to understand the boy he was, the man he tried to become, and the quiet battles he fought when no one was watching. This story is not about exposing scandals or pointing fingers. It is not about blaming or judging. It is about how someone who learned to survive by making people laugh eventually had to face the quiet parts of life that laughter could not protect him from anymore. It is the journey of a man who discovered humor as a way to stay seen in a crowded childhood home, and later had to learn how to live with himself when the laughter faded and the rooms became quiet. Bill once said something that explains more about him than most interviews ever could. He said, "If people weren't laughing, I wasn't really there." This simple sentence opens a deep window into his past. It shows that laughter was never just a job for him. It was his way of feeling real, feeling noticed, feeling safe. It was his way of keeping himself from disappearing in a world that felt too big and too loud for a sensitive young boy. This idea of using humor as life support would follow him into adulthood, into his career, and even into his relationships, shaping everything he did and everything he struggled with. As he sits in his Charleston home, the past comes back to him in small ways. Sometimes it's a photograph of his parents or siblings that brings back old memories. Sometimes it's a line from Ghostbusters drifting from the television, reminding him of the years when success finally found him. Sometimes it's the drawing of a child taped to an old frame, reminding him of the years he tried to be a good father while dealing with wounds he never properly healed. These little moments pull him into reflection, helping him connect the man he is now with the boy he used to be. There are nights when he sits alone in a chair, listening to the soft sounds of the Conter's house, thinking about how fast life moved. He thinks about the choices he made, the people he loved, the people he hurt, and the people he lost too soon. He thinks about the years when he felt unstoppable, and the years when he felt like he was barely hanging on. At this stage of his life, Bill Murray has learned that silence can carry as much truth as laughter ever did. But before he became the man who could make the world laugh with one raised eyebrow, he was just a child in a cramped, cold house with 9 children fighting for space. A boy trying to stay visible in a home where attention was rare and laughter was a way to earn your place. How does a child raised in that kind of chaos grow into the quiet superstar the world remembers? That answer begins long before the fame ever came. Long before Bill Murray ever thought about acting or comedy, his first audience was his own family sitting around a crowded kitchen table. He was born on the 21st of September, 1950, in Evanston, Illinois, into a large Irish Catholic family with 9 children. The Murray home was small, noisy, and always full. The walls were thin, the winters were cold, and the house often felt too cramped for the number of people living in it. His father, Edward, worked long days at a lumber yard, a physically demanding job that became harder as diabetes started affecting his health. By the time Bill was old enough to remember things clearly, his father already looked tired most days. His body struggled to keep up, and his eyes showed the strain of trying to support such a big family on limited income. His mother, Lucille, carried the rest of the weight. She cooked, cleaned, washed clothes, settled fights, helped with homework, and tried to keep 9 children fed and safe. She was the emotional glue in the house, the person who tried to make sure the family stayed together, even when stress and exhaustion hung in every corner. She wasn't warm in the way some mothers are, but she wasn't cold either. She was simply a woman who had too much on her shoulders and too little time to rest. In the Murray home, love wasn't shown through hugs and soft words. It was shown through survival, food on the table, clean clothes, and the effort to keep going every day. The dinner table was the center of the house. It wasn't big enough for everyone, but they squeezed in anyway. Bill later joked, 11 people? Pretty good audience. At that table, laughter became a kind of currency. It wasn't forced, but it was valuable. With so many children, the only way to get attention was to stand out, and the easiest way to do that was to be funny. Bill learned early that if you made his father laugh, even for a moment, you were seen. And in a large family where everyone was fighting for space, being seen mattered more than almost anything. At those dinners, soup often went cold before everyone got their share. Cutlery clattered as kids leaned over bowls, trying to talk, trying to be heard, trying to grab a moment of connection. Bill watched his father carefully. Even though his father was sick and tired, his laughter meant something. It meant approval. It meant presence. It meant a short escape from the heaviness of adult responsibilities. Bill learned to chase that sound. One night, he tried to impress the family by doing a James Cagney impression. He stood up, mimicked the actor's tough guy walk, and in the middle of his act he slipped on the floor. He fell hard, hitting his head. For a moment, everything hurt. But instead of concern, the room burst into laughter. All his brothers and sisters were laughing at him, not with him. The pain was real, but the reaction from the family was louder than his own discomfort. Something clicked inside him in that moment. He stood back up, held back the sting of embarrassment, and bowed as if it was all part of the act. He said, "Thank you for your attention." That small moment became symbolic of something that would shape his entire life. It was the first time he learned to cover a wound with humor, to hide pain behind a joke, to turn something that hurt into something that made others laugh. This habit would follow him through childhood, into adulthood, and into his career. It became an emotional reflex. When something hurts, make it funny, so it hurts less. School wasn't any easier for him. Bill attended a Jesuit school where discipline was strict and expectations were high. His teachers often misunderstood him. They saw a boy who didn't pay attention, who drifted through lessons, who doodled in his notebooks, who daydreamed instead of following instructions. They didn't see a child who felt lost and struggled to stay focused because so much of his emotional energy was spent at home. They didn't see a sensitive boy trying to survive in a loud world. Instead, they saw a troublemaker or someone not taking things seriously. Bill drifted through those early school years, feeling unseen in a place where he was supposed to be learning and growing. He often felt disconnected, as if he was present physically but not truly noticed. He found small escape in drawing, imagination, and quiet thoughts. But the place where he felt most at ease wasn't in a classroom at all. It was on a golf course. As a young teenager, Bill worked as a caddy. The golf course was the opposite of his noisy home and strict school. It was open, green, calm, and full of fresh air. He could walk alone, think quietly, and breathe in a way he couldn't inside his crowded house. On the course, he didn't have to fight for attention or explain himself. He just had to do his job, observe people, and enjoy the space. The long walks and quiet surroundings gave him time to be himself without pressure. He didn't know it then, but these moments would later help shape his sense of timing, observation, and humor. Around this time, he also noticed acting. He wasn't drawn to it because of applause or fame. He was drawn to it because it allowed him to feel something real inside himself. Performing gave him a place where he wasn't just one of 9 kids or a misunderstood student. It gave him a small sense of identity. He realized something important. If I can make them laugh, I exist. That belief started forming long before he ever stood on a real stage. Bill's childhood was a mixture of chaos, noise, humor, and silent hurt. He learned early how to stand out by being funny, how to use humor to protect himself, how to hide pain, and how to survive in a world that often felt overwhelming. But just as he was learning how to take bruises and turn them into jokes, life was getting ready to hit him with something no punchline could soften. A moment was coming that would stop him in his tracks and change his life forever. At 17 years old, Bill Murray faced a moment that changed everything in his life. His father, Edward, who had struggled for years with diabetes, finally became too sick for his body to keep going. Bill remembered visiting the hospital, seeing his father tired and weak, and trying to understand what was happening. When his father passed away in 1967, it felt like the world around him cracked open. The Murray house, once loud and full of movement, suddenly became heavy and quiet. The noise of 9 children could not cover the emptiness left behind. At the dinner table, an empty chair sat where his father used to be, and his mother carried herself with a weight that showed she was now responsible for everything alone. Bill felt something inside him collapse. The person he had always tried to make laugh, the person whose approval meant everything, was gone. He found himself asking, "Who am I performing for now?" With his father gone, Bill's childhood ended almost overnight. There was no time to grieve properly. His mother was overwhelmed, and bills kept coming. There were younger siblings who needed help, and the house felt even more crowded now that the parent had to stretch herself to cover the needs of so many children. Bill tried his best to step into adulthood before he was ready. He did chores, helped where he could, and tried to stay steady for his family. But inside, he felt numb. The sadness was there, but it was buried under responsibility, confusion, and the pressure to grow up faster than any teenager should have to. His family encouraged him to go to college so he could build a stable future. They hoped he would follow a respectable path, something that could lift him out of the struggles they had lived with for so long. Bill enrolled in pre-med at Regis University in Denver. It was a huge change from his life in Illinois. He suddenly found himself far from home, surrounded by students who seemed confident and clear about their purpose. But Bill didn't feel that way at all. He drifted through his early months at college. He skipped lectures, wandered across campus without direction, and spent days feeling foggy and disconnected. He didn't feel like he fit in. He felt like a wrong puzzle piece placed in a picture where he didn't belong. He couldn't focus, couldn't motivate himself, and couldn't understand why he felt so lost, while others around him seemed to be doing fine. His time at Regis took a disastrous turn when he made a careless joke at the airport. Nervous and immature, he joked to another passenger that he was carrying a bomb. Authorities searched his bag, and although they didn't find any explosive, they discovered nearly 10 pounds of marijuana. The joke that was supposed to be funny turned into a serious situation. Bill went from being a drifting college student to a young man in real legal trouble. The weight of the mistake hit him hard. He realized how deeply he had messed up, and the fear of what might happen next shook him to the core. After the incident, he returned home in shame. He had no degree, no direction, and nothing to show for his time away. His family was struggling financially, just as before, and now he had added a new layer of disappointment. The rooms in the house still felt cramped, windows still frosted in winter. The same heavy atmosphere surrounded his mother as she tried to manage overdue bills and the needs of so many children. Bill slept in crowded bedrooms again, hearing siblings snore through cold nights, wondering how he had drifted so far off track. Every day reminded him of what he had failed to do. To help his family and himself, he took whatever jobs he could. None of them were easy or glamorous. He worked construction jobs that left his back sore. He wiped greasy counters in pizza shops. He scooped popcorn in theater lobbies that smelled stale. Many days, he woke up before sunrise, bundled himself against the cold, and waited at bus stops, hoping to make it on time. Some weeks brought steady work, while others offered nothing at all. Money was tight, and the pressure was constant. He worked long hours but felt like he wasn't getting anywhere. During this time, his self-esteem sank. He began to think, maybe I'm not good at anything at all. Emotionally, this was one of the lowest periods of his life. He felt invisible in the world, as though he slipped through cracks no one noticed. He felt ashamed of his choices, unsure of his future, and uncertain of his place in life. At night, he sometimes lay awake, thinking about how everything had changed so quickly, from losing his father, to drifting in college, to facing legal trouble, to working jobs with no path forward. He once said later in life, "There was a point where I didn't see a place for myself." That sentence describes exactly how he felt during these years. Bill didn't know it then, but these struggles were shaping him in quiet ways. They were building parts of his personality he would later use in his acting career. The frustration, the uncertainty, the feeling of not fitting in, those emotions would eventually help him connect to roles that felt honest and human. But at that time, nothing made sense to him. Life seemed like one long chain of hard days, cold mornings, and small disappointments. Just when it looked like his life was going to settle permanently into survival mode, something unexpected happened. A single invitation arrived from someone who believed in him, someone who saw something in Bill that he couldn't yet see in himself. That moment cracked open a door he didn't even know was there, and it became the beginning of a new path that would change his life forever. After years of drifting, working small jobs, and feeling unsure of where his life was going, Bill Murray was pulled back onto a better path by someone who knew him well. His older brother, Brian Doyle Murray, had always seen a spark in Bill. Even under the sarcasm, the tiredness, and the confusion, Brian noticed something real, something sharp, funny, and different. He saw a talent that Bill himself no longer believed he had. Brian refused to let his younger brother fade into a life of odd jobs and lost potential. He encouraged Bill to audition for Second City, the famous Chicago improv group where many great comedians got their start. At first, Bill didn't feel confident at all. He didn't walk into Second City as a rising star. He walked in as someone who felt he had nowhere else to go. He was nervous, unsure of himself, and still carrying the weight of the mistakes and losses from the past few years. But he trusted Brian, and he had nothing to lose. So he stepped into the building, into the bright rehearsal lights, and into a world that would become the foundation of his career. Second City was not gentle. The training was demanding. Teachers pushed performers to dig deeper, to take emotional risks, to reveal parts of themselves they usually kept hidden. Exercises often felt uncomfortable and intense. Bill spent many rehearsals sweating through scenes, unsure if he was doing well or failing completely. He wasn't the polished performer people would later know. He was rough, inconsistent, and still figuring out who he was on stage. But Second City forced him to confront himself in ways he never had before. Slowly, he began to discover his unique comedic voice. He learned that he didn't have to shout or exaggerate to be funny. His strength came from silence, timing, and an expression that stayed calm even when the situation around him was chaotic. His deadpan stare, his quiet comments, and his wounded sarcasm were not weaknesses, they were his style. He understood that he could use his own past, his pain, and his awkwardness as material. Instead of hiding his emotions, he learned to shape them into something that made people laugh in an honest way. The audiences didn't laugh at him the way his siblings once had. They laughed because they understood him. For the first time, the laughter felt supportive, not hurtful. In Second City, Bill also found something he never really experienced before: a sense of belonging. His fellow performers recognized that he was different and talented. They saw the depth behind his humor, the intelligence behind his timing, and the vulnerability behind his quiet style. Many nights were spent in late rehearsals, sitting in cramped backstage rooms, sharing cigarettes, talking about life, art, and the future. These friendships weren't loud or dramatic. They were honest and comforting. Bill realized he wasn't alone. He had a place where he fit. He once said that for the first time, he felt like he belonged somewhere, and that feeling changed him. As he continued training, something important shifted inside him. Laughter was no longer just a shield he used to protect himself from pain. It became something he could control, shape, and use to connect with the world. Comedy became an instrument instead of armor. The melancholy he carried, the quiet sadness from his childhood, the loneliness from school, the wounds from losing his father didn't disappear, but it became part of his performance. It gave his humor a shape that felt real, not forced. He learned that his emotional depth made his comedy stronger, not weaker. Instead of trying to hide his sensitivity, he allowed it to give his work meaning. Little by little, word began to spread about him. He had a stage presence that people remembered. He was unpredictable in a way that surprised audiences, but also made them lean in. His jokes landed differently than others. His timing felt natural, almost instinctive. He never tried too hard, but he always made an impact. Sketches he performed started to get attention. People came to shows hoping to see more of him. Directors, writers, and other performers began to notice that he was doing something fresh and exciting. This momentum gave Bill something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He began to believe that he might actually have a future doing something he cared about. For so many years, he had felt unsure, lost, or stuck. Now, doors were opening slowly but steadily. He stayed committed, kept working, and kept learning. Second City became the place where he rebuilt his confidence and rewrote the direction of his life. These years didn't make him famous yet, but they built the foundation for everything that would come later. They taught him the skills he needed, connected him with the people who would eventually help shape his career, and gave him a safe space to grow. Most importantly, they helped him understand who he was, not just as a performer, but as a person. Bill discovered that he didn't need to fit into anyone else's idea of comedy. His own voice was strong enough. His own experience was unique enough. His own style, shaped by years of quiet observation and emotional struggle, would become the key to his success. But what Second City could not prepare him for was the pressure of stepping onto a national stage. Winning over a room of Chicago improv fans was one thing. Winning over the whole country, especially on a live, high-stakes platform, was something else entirely. And as Bill's reputation grew, the opportunity that would bring him into the national spotlight finally arrived. It would test him more than anything he had ever faced. Because if Second City taught him how to survive on stage, what came next would push him to discover whether he could survive when the whole country was watching and silently judging whether he deserved to be there at all. When Bill Murray joined Saturday Night Live in 1977, he didn't walk in as a big star or a celebrated addition. There was no warm applause, no excited welcome from the cast, and no special treatment from the writers. Instead, he entered the building quietly, almost awkwardly, feeling like an outsider in a place where everyone already knew each other. The writers often walked past him without stopping. Some cast members weren't sure he belonged there. Even audiences who saw him on screen during his early weeks didn't know what to make of him. Bill later said he felt like he was drowning, while everyone else watched without reaching out a hand. He struggled to find his place. SNL was fast, stressful, and competitive. If you didn't stand out quickly, you risked being forgotten. Bill knew this, and the pressure built inside him. He was afraid that if he didn't prove himself soon, he would be fired and sent back to the same uncertain life he had before. He didn't want to disappoint the people who believed in him, especially his brother Brian and his friends from Second City. So he decided to write something on his own, something that would force the audience to notice him. That decision gave birth to a sketch that would change everything for him, the shower mic bit. Bill wrote it out of fear, out of the need to survive. In the sketch, he held a microphone in the shower and spoke directly to the audience in a way that was honest and slightly awkward. It wasn't a loud or wild performance. It was simple, direct, and full of his natural deadpan humor. When the sketch aired, the audience finally clicked with him. They laughed, not out of confusion, but because they understood him. In that moment, the Bill Murray persona, quiet, sharp, and slightly wounded and mischievous, found its home in American comedy. As he settled into the show, Bill began forming deeper connections with some of the cast members. John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis, and Gilda Radner became people he worked closely with. Their creative energy was chaotic and exciting. They worked long hours, wrote sketches at strange times of night, argued, laughed, and pushed each other to do better. Their world was full of risk-taking, late-night parties, strong personalities, and constant pressure. But it was also full of friendship and loyalty. These were people who understood the strange mix of insecurity and confidence needed to survive in comedy. They became like a tribe, a group that shared the same struggles and the same desire to create something memorable. But even in those strong friendships, conflicts still happened. One of the biggest early clashes was with Chevy Chase, a former cast member who returned to host an episode. Tension built up between them, and it eventually exploded backstage. The argument became loud and heated, and it later became one of the most talked-about fights in SNL history. Moments like this contributed to the early seeds of Bill's difficult reputation. Some people saw him as unpredictable or emotionally guarded. Others saw him as honest, direct, and unwilling to pretend. The truth was somewhere in the middle. He was still learning how to manage the complicated mix of pride, insecurity, pressure, and past wounds that he carried with him. As SNL gave him more visibility, Hollywood began to notice him. Soon he found himself moving from television into film. His first big movie success came with Meatballs in 1979, where his charm and comedic timing made him a standout. His next films, including Caddyshack and Stripes, helped shape a familiar character type that audiences loved, the lovable troublemaker. He played roles full of charm, rebellious behavior, and humor that felt loose and natural. People connected with his relaxed style. They liked that he didn't seem to try too hard, that he felt real and unpredictable. But while his career grew on the outside, something different was happening inside him. Success didn't fix the emptiness he sometimes felt. He had become a star in comedy, but he often felt stuck in that identity. He worried he was becoming a one-dimensional version of himself, both professionally and emotionally. He was always expected to be the funny guy, the strange one, the one who made everything a joke. But he knew there were deeper parts of him, that people never saw: the quiet sadness from his childhood, the pain from losing his father, the uncertainty he carried from his early adult years. He often felt typecast not only in movies, but in life. People laughed at the characters he played, but they didn't see the real person beneath them. He sometimes wondered if anyone knew what he actually felt or needed. It was a confusing time. Fame brought opportunities and excitement, but it also brought isolation and pressure. He didn't know how to balance the two. He didn't know how to show the serious side of himself without disappointing the people who expected him to be funny. Still, his career continued to rise. With every movie, his presence grew stronger. Audiences trusted him. They liked the strange mix of warmth and rough edges he brought to his roles. And then, an opportunity arrived that would change everything. A movie that would lift him to a level of success he had never imagined. That movie was Ghostbusters, a project so big it would turn Bill Murray into a global icon. But the higher the world lifted him, the more dangerous it would become when he finally tried to show people who he really was beneath the smirk. Ghostbusters became the movie that changed Bill Murray's life in a way no one expected. When it came out in 1984, it exploded in popularity. The film was funny, strange, exciting, and completely different from anything else at the time. Kids dressed up as the characters for Halloween. Adults repeated lines from the movie at work. Families watched it again and again. Many of Bill's lines became catchphrases that people quoted for years. Ghostbusters did not just make him famous, it made him a cultural figure. Almost overnight, he went from a popular comedian to someone recognized everywhere he went. People on the street didn't shout, "Bill Murray!" At him, they shouted his character's lines. It was clear the world wanted him to stay exactly the same: funny, sarcastic, unpredictable, and relaxed. But inside, Bill felt something different. While everyone celebrated him as the funny guy, he felt a growing desire to show he could do more. He didn't want to be trapped in one type of role. He didn't want to live in a box labeled clown for the rest of his career. He felt there was a deeper, more serious side of him that people did not understand. He wanted to explore stories that were meaningful, emotional, and thoughtful. This desire pushed him toward a project that meant a lot to him personally: The Razor's Edge. The Razor's Edge was nothing like Ghostbusters. It was slow, serious, and philosophical. It explored grief, purpose, and the search for meaning. Bill took the role because he wanted to prove he could carry a dramatic performance. He wanted to show a part of himself that had nothing to do with jokes. The film was his passion project. He believed in it, hoped for it, and put a lot of emotion into it. But when the movie came out, it was a painful disappointment. Critics didn't like it. The box office numbers were poor. Audiences didn't show up. After the huge success of Ghostbusters, the failure of The Razor's Edge hit Bill hard. It wasn't just a movie failing, it felt personal. He later expressed the feeling in simple words: "When I finally showed them my soul, they walked away." To him, the world had accepted the comedian, but rejected the person behind the comedy. This emotional blow pushed him to step back from Hollywood. Bill didn't announce anything publicly. He didn't make a big statement. He simply disappeared. He moved to Paris, far from the pressure, noise, and expectations. In Paris, life was slower. He took philosophy classes, visited museums, walked the streets alone, and spent long hours in cafes thinking. Being there gave him space to question who he really was. Without Hollywood demanding jokes, without audiences expecting him to be funny, he was left with his own thoughts. He wondered, if I'm not the joke, who am I? These quiet months were important for him. They didn't solve everything, but they helped him understand that humor alone was not enough to keep him balanced. He needed a sense of identity that wasn't tied only to making people laugh. When he eventually returned to Hollywood, he came back changed. He wasn't as eager to please everyone. He wasn't willing to bend as easily. He wanted to do work he felt connected to, not work that simply kept him in the spotlight. This new attitude led to friction on some projects. One example was Scrooged, a dark comedy where the director, Richard Donner, pushed Bill to be louder, bigger, and more exaggerated. Bill resisted these directions. He felt the character needed more subtlety. Their different views caused tension on set, and the experience left him frustrated. Another example was Quick Change, a film he co-directed. Working closely with Geena Davis created stress, misunderstandings, and contributed to stories about him being difficult to work with. These moments were not about anger or ego. They came from a man trying to protect his creative voice while still learning how to express his needs clearly. Still, even with these struggles, Bill's career continued to move forward. And soon, a project arrived that would become one of the most important films he ever made, Groundhog Day. On the surface, it looked like a clever comedy about a man repeating the same day over and over. But the script carried much deeper meaning. It explored change, self-reflection, emotional growth, and the idea of being trapped in your own patterns, all things Bill had been dealing with privately for years. Groundhog Day reunited him with Harold Ramis, his longtime friend and collaborator. They had worked together on several successful films, and their chemistry had always been strong. But this movie touched something personal in Bill. The emotional themes hit close to his own struggles. He wanted the film to reflect the seriousness he felt inside. Harold, meanwhile, had a clearer vision of the story as a comedy with heart, but still a comedy. Their different interpretations led to tension as filming went on. Bill pushed for a deeper, darker tone. Harold tried to balance humor with meaning. Neither the studio nor the crew understood how much this movie mirrored Bill's real emotional challenges. They didn't know how strongly he connected to the character's inner conflict. They didn't see how much he was wrestling with his own worries while trying to shape the role. What no one knew, not Harold, not the cast, not the people behind the camera, was that Groundhog Day would become both the highlight of Bill's artistic career and the breaking point of one of the most important friendships he ever had. Behind Bill Murray's biggest roles and strongest performances, there were people he cared about, deeply people who shaped his heart, his humor, and his pain. Many of them entered his life when he was still becoming the person the world would later recognize. One of the first, and most important, was Gilda Radner. They met during their National Lampoon days, long before SNL and long before fame changed everything around them. Their connection was immediate, comfortable, and complicated. Some people around them wondered if it was a romance. Others thought they were just close friends. The truth was somewhere in between. They laughed together in a way that made both of them feel lighter. They argued the way two people argue when they care too much. They walked around New York talking about work, stress, fear, and hope. There was an emotional spark that never fully settled into a relationship, but never went away either. When Gilda became sick years later with ovarian cancer, Bill struggled to understand how to help her. He visited her in the hospital, But the jokes that used to make her laugh didn't work anymore. This was one situation where humor simply could not soften the pain. He sat with her quietly, feeling helpless. After she passed away in 1989, Bill rarely spoke about her. Not because he didn't care, but because the grief was too sharp to touch. Her memory stayed with him, a reminder of how unpredictable life can be and how quickly someone important can slip away. Bill's first marriage began with hope. He met Margaret Kelly in the late 1972. She was calm, strong, and unlike many people in the entertainment world, they married in a simple Las Vegas ceremony in 1981, choosing something small and private instead of something loud and flashy. Their early years together brought Bill a sense of peace he had never felt before. When their sons Homer and Luke were born, he felt a new kind of responsibility. He wanted to be the father he never had. He tried hard showing up at games, reading to them, and being present when work allowed. But as Bill's career grew busier, the home he loved started to feel distant. His absences became longer. The emotional weight he carried from childhood, from his father's death, from unresolved grief, began to show. Margaret felt him drifting. Conversations got shorter, silences grew heavier, and the connection they once had began to weaken. Around the time he was filming Groundhog Day, Bill formed an emotional connection with someone else. It wasn't a loud or dramatic situation, but it was enough to deepen the cracks in his marriage. By 1996, after 17 years together, the marriage quietly ended. There was no big fight, no dramatic breakup. It was simply a slow heartbreak, the kind that leaves both people wondering how something that once felt so solid slipped away. Just a year later, Bill entered a new chapter when he married Jennifer Butler in 1997. He was 47 at the time, older, more experienced, and hoping for another chance at a stable family life. Jennifer was strong, creative, and understanding. Together they had 4 sons: Caleb, Jackson, Cooper, and Lincoln. The early years of this marriage were full of energy and joy. Bill spent time helping with the boys, playing with them, and experiencing the kind of busy family life he had known as a child. He thought, maybe this time I won't fail. But old wounds have a way of returning if they aren't healed. As time went on, Bill began withdrawing again. Some days he closed himself in rooms for long stretches. Other days he disappeared into work, unable to balance the emotional demands of family life. Jennifer noticed the growing distance. She tried to hold the family together, but the strain became too much. In 2008, she filed for divorce and took the 4 boys with her. Bill was left in a silent house once more, surrounded by empty rooms and reminders of what he had lost. Another important relationship in Bill's life was with Harold Ramis. They met when they were young comedians, and their bond grew into one of the strongest friendships in his life. They worked together on many films, including Ghostbusters, Stripes, and Caddyshack. Harold understood Bill's humor, his sadness, and his quirks better than almost anyone. But during the making of Groundhog Day, their creative visions clashed. Bill wanted the film to be more serious and emotional. Harold wanted it to stay closer to a comedic structure. The tension grew, and the friendship slowly faded. They stopped talking. The silence lasted for years. Later, when Harold became seriously ill, Bill realized he couldn't let things end that way. He visited Harold in the hospital. The 2 men shared a quiet moment that didn't need many words. There was forgiveness in the air, simple, human, and real. Shortly after that visit, Harold passed away. Bill carried a deep sadness from that loss. He had gotten the chance to say goodbye, but he also knew the years of silence between them could never be undone. As Bill reflected on these relationships, he began to understand a painful truth. Unhealed pain can break even the strongest bonds. When people don't face their emotional wounds, they often pass them on without meaning to. He once said, "Some apologies arrive decades too late," and he knew that feeling well. The patterns were clear: friends lost to distance, marriages lost to emotional drift, and loved ones lost before he could tell them everything he felt. And just when it seemed like life had already taken enough from him, time returned to take even more. The next losses would reach all the way back to where his story began, to the people who held his world together from the start. Losing his mother in 1988 was one of the moments that changed Bill Murray in ways he didn't fully understand until he was older. Lucille had been the center of a house with 9 children. After Bill's father died, she carried the entire family on her shoulders. She cooked, cleaned, worked, worried, and held everything together with almost no help. When Bill was young, he saw her only as Mom, the person who made things run, the person who made sure everyone survived another day. He didn't understand how much weight she carried or how much she sacrificed. It was only when he became a father himself, dealing with his own mistakes, his own exhaustion, and his own drifting family, that he realized how strong she had been. Her death hit him deeply, not only because he loved her, but because he realized too late that he had never thanked her properly, never seen her fully as a woman with her own pain and needs. That regret stayed with him, sharp and steady. Years later, in 2020, another loss arrived. His older brother Edward passed away. Edward had been a big part of his childhood. He was the brother who took Bill to the golf course, who showed him how to earn tips as a young caddy, who gave him confidence when life felt uncertain. Many of the early ideas that later inspired the movie Caddyshack came from those long days on the course. Losing a sibling is different from losing anyone else. Siblings are the last people who know your childhood the way you lived it. They remember the same rooms, the same winters, the same family stories. When they go, a part of your past disappears with them. After Edward died, Bill found himself reaching for the phone out of habit, wanting to share a memory or a joke, before remembering there was no one on the other end anymore. That silence felt heavier than any other kind of quiet. But long before these later losses, Bill had been fighting a different kind of darkness inside himself. Depression had been part of his life since he was young. It came and went, sometimes quietly, sometimes strongly enough to pull him toward places he didn't want to be. During some of his lowest periods, one person who refused to let him fall apart was Hunter S. Thompson. Hunter was unpredictable, intense, and wild, but he cared about Bill in a way that showed through his chaos. He would call Bill at strange hours, drag him into strange adventures, and push him to keep moving when Bill felt like giving up. Hunter didn't comfort him with soft words. Instead, he forced him to stay engaged with life. Losing Hunter in 2005 added another layer of grief, because Hunter had been one of the few people who knew how deep Bill's struggles could go. There was also a moment years earlier when Bill felt so lost that he didn't know if he could keep going. He visited an art museum during a time when he felt completely overwhelmed. There he saw a painting called The Song of the Lark. It showed a young girl standing in a field with the early morning light behind her. Something about her expression, the mix of strength and exhaustion, reached him. He felt, in a simple and direct way, that she was surviving something difficult, and if she could stand there and face another day, maybe he could too. Bill has said many times, "That painting saved my life," and he meant it. It was one of the few moments where art cut through his darkness and gave him enough hope to continue. Then in 2021, another loss came that reopened many old wounds. Jennifer, the mother of his 4 younger sons, passed away. Even though they had divorced years earlier, her death struck Bill in a way he wasn't prepared for. It wasn't just the pain of losing someone important. It was the realization that his sons were now living a version of his own childhood, parents separated, a home split in two, and now a mother gone too soon. It created a painful loop in his mind. He remembered himself as a boy, sitting at a table after his father died, feeling the weight of loss he didn't fully understand. Now his sons were facing their own version of that heartbreak. This thought cut deeply into him. It made him rethink his choices, his absences, and the ways his old emotional wounds had affected the people who depended on him. Through all these losses, patterns became clearer to him. Pain that isn't faced does not disappear. Instead, it moves through families quietly. It affects conversations, reactions, and connections. Bill began to set the desires, understand that his own fears and unresolved grief had shaped his relationships more than he wanted to admit. He saw how the emotional habits he formed as a child, keeping distance, staying quiet, hiding hurt behind humor, had followed him into adulthood and affected the people he loved. Love alone was never the problem. It was the pain underneath the surface that kept breaking things apart. That realization didn't come with anger or blame. It came as a quiet truth. Families don't fall apart because people stop caring. They fall apart when pain is passed down without being healed. Bill had spent years trying to stay busy, trying to stay funny, trying to stay liked, but none of that protected him from the deeper work he had avoided. Now, with so many of the people he once relied on gone, his mother, his brother, his friend Hunter, and Jennifer, Bill found himself facing the hardest question of all. What does a man do when the laughter fades, when the people who built his world are no longer there, and when the only thing left is a house full of memories and a mind that remembers every mistake in sharp detail? When the story returns to present-day Charleston, everything looks the same as before. The same porch, the same slow evenings, the same soft air coming in from the water. But now, with everything we've learned about his past, the quiet inside that house feels different. It is no longer the silence of a movie star hiding from the world. It is the silence of a man who has lived through enough storms to finally sit with them. The old Jeep still waits in the driveway. The walls still hold photos from different decades of his life. On one shelf, there are drawings his children made when they were young, their edges slightly curled from age. A few scripts rest on a table beside charity event posters from golf tournaments he helped organize. None of it is arranged for show. It all sits there naturally, like pieces of a long, uneven life he has learned not to run from. By most standards, Bill Murray is a wealthy man. His net worth, his properties, his ownership stake in the Charleston River Dogs baseball team, and the Caddyshack restaurant he built with his brothers show a level of success many dream of. But for him, these things are not symbols of winning or displays of luxury. They are reminders of survival. The homes he bought were places where he tried to find rest. The cars he kept were vehicles that carried him through long nights when he needed to think. Nothing feels like a trophy. It feels more like someone building safe spaces after a childhood that never felt secure. His relationship with his sons today reflects years of learning, failing, and quietly trying again. It is not perfect, and he would never pretend it is, but it is real. They visit him when they can, and he makes an effort to be present in a way he didn't always know how to be when they were younger. They play golf together, share stories, laugh about things that used to feel heavy, and sometimes sit on the porch without needing to say much at all. Bill no longer hides behind constant jokes or avoids deeper conversations the way he once did. Age has softened him. He understands now that showing up with honesty matters more than being entertaining. There are grandchildren in his life too, and they bring out a side of him that didn't always have space to grow when he was busy raising his own kids. In their faces, he sometimes sees pieces of the family he lost, shapes of his mother's smile, flashes of his father's eyes, hints of his siblings' expressions. These moments remind him that life continues in quiet ways. Around them, he is gentle, patient, and open in ways he wished he had been earlier in his life. It feels like a small second chance. Although he rarely talks about it publicly, Bill has spent many years giving back quietly. He donates to children's hospitals, supports disaster relief efforts, funds scholarships, helps local organizations, and shows up at charity events without expecting recognition. He doesn't make long speeches or try to draw attention to himself. To him, giving is a way to repay the kindness that helped him survive hard years. He knows what it feels like to rely on support you don't always know how to ask for. Helping others quietly makes him feel balanced. Depression still exists in his life, but he relates to it differently now. Instead of seeing it as something that suddenly pulls him down, he understands it as a long corridor he has walked through many times. Some days it is lighter, and some days it is heavier. But he no longer tries to outrun it. He knows it doesn't define him, and he knows it doesn't mean he is broken. He faces it the same way he faces everything, now slowly, gently, and with the understanding that survival is not a single victory, but a daily choice. He tries to choose small joys, a walk outside, a cup of coffee, a visit from his sons, an old song, or a quiet moment on his porch. As he reflects on everything he has lived through, his childhood struggles, the people he lost, the mistakes he made, the friendships he damaged, the marriages that broke, and the successes that surprised even him, Bill understands that resilience is not about never falling apart. It is about continuing to move forward even after years that could have defeated him. Humor helped him survive, but what keeps him steady now is acceptance. He no longer feels the need to perform for everyone. He doesn't need to prove anything. He simply tries to live honestly, even on days when honesty is painful. The heart of his story is not about fame or money. It is about a man trying to understand himself after decades of carrying heavy emotions he didn't know how to talk about. It is about learning to forgive himself, learning to stay present, and learning to offer kindness where he once offered distance. It is about a lifetime of being shaped by grief, shaped by love, shaped by mistakes, and shaped by quiet attempts to do better. In the end, this story turns toward the viewer. It becomes an invitation. If you've carried pain, if you've lived through losses you don't talk about, if you've survived years where you felt invisible or overwhelmed, then Bill's story reflects something in you too. You are not alone in trying to stay steady. You are not alone in trying to heal old wounds. And like him, you deserve gentleness. Before closing, the story invites you to share the Bill Murray moment you remember most, whatever scene, line, or expression stayed with you over the years. Your memories help keep his legacy living in a way no award ever could. And maybe that is the quiet truth at the center of his life. It's not that he made the whole world laugh, but that he kept choosing to stay, even when staying felt like the hardest role he ever had to play. The rest of the story, how his legacy continues, is written not by studios or headlines, but by you, and the memories you carry of the man behind the smile.